So what we got going on here? This is AP Dual Credit Psychology, Unit 4, Lecture 4, and the equivalent would be Psychology, Unit 3, Lecture 4, if everything is accurate here. So let's see if that's the case. I'm not sure. Forget, ironically. Look at what we're covering: forgetting, memory construction, and improvement. Remember we talked about how memory is not a photograph. It's not a picture. Every time we go to a memory, we change it a little bit. We get our grubby fingers all over it. So it's never pure. And when we forget things, it's sometimes we just forget where we put it. And since we can get parts of it, we fill in the other gaps. And then this becomes our new reality of what happened. I might have said this before, but let me say it again. When somebody tells something that didn't actually happen, it's not necessarily a lie. A lie is you know the truth, but you're intentionally trying to deceive. Sometimes we have false memories, which means that our perception of what's happened in the past, our putting together of what's happened in the past, is reconstructed wrong. And so our reality is wrong. That sometimes when we see pictures or videos of something, it's unrecognizable because we don't have those files in our brain. That's what we're going to talk about today. William James, who we talked about as the father of psychology before, said that we would be as bad off if we remembered everything as if we were to remember nothing, because we remembered everything, we'd always be stuck in our heads and we'd never be able to sort of live in the moment. Everything that ever happened to you, every moment you constantly had. I mean, some things we just want to forget because we'll obsess over or anything else. So when we forget, sometimes we forget because of absent-mindedness. We just never encoded it in the first place. Threw your keys down, don't remember where you put them. Sometimes it's decay due to us not using. I couldn't tell you about what I had for lunch in the second grade on a Thursday in the fall of, I can't remember what year I was in the second grade, because I haven't gone back to that. We piled and piled and piled and piled and piled memories on top of that. I haven't used it. Sometimes we block it because we don't want to get to it. It could be harmful. It could be something about my past I don't want to remember, so I'm not going to go back to it. Sometimes when we go to a memory, we distort it. We bring it back as a little bit more positive or a little bit more negative than what it was. If we want to remember an event as being harmful or bad, we're only going to remember the bad things about it. And if we want to remember it as good, we're only going to remember the good things about it. Sometimes we're very suggestible to particular memories, talking to other people and sort of taking their account over our account, and their account changes our account, even though our account might have been more accurate. Bias, we use our past experience to impact new actions and how we encode things. You know, my bias with white pickup trucks. Who cut you off that caused the accident? It was a white pickup truck, because I want to believe my bias is true. And since I want to believe my bias is true, I may stick with that. And sometimes persistence, we're unable to forget things that we want to forget. If I told you to not think about a polar bear, guess what's in your head? Okay, so again, sometimes it's transient, absent-mindedness, blocking. We can become confused because of suggestibility bias, what we just talked about. So again, sometimes retrieval failure, we don't get it back correctly. Sometimes interference theory, other things sort of interfere with our past and what we thought about. Sometimes we're motivated. I don't want to remember something. And sometimes it's just we don't go to it. We don't cross that bridge. You know, we stop making those neural connections. We stop going across those particular neurons, and they just, you don't lose it, you use it. My ability to roll my R's, don't remember how to do that because I haven't spoken Spanish for a long time, well, ever, really. So, but my ability to roll my R's when I was a kid, it's kind of gone. All right, so again, can happen at any stage of memory. We've talked about sensory memory, we've talked about short-term memory, we've talked about long-term memory. And at any moment of this, forgetting can start to occur because, for example, the 2 billion bits of information that are happening in our sensory memory, we don't remember all 2 billion bits of it. I don't remember. I can feel my shirt on my sleeve or the sleeve of my shirt on my arm right now. but I can't specifically tell you what that felt like 3 minutes ago or 30 seconds ago because I never encoded it. It was just always there. The short-term memory, that phone number that we get, then I don't need it. So that sort of goes away. Long-term storage, I put it away, then I retrieve it from storage, and then I don't necessarily get every bit of it as I'm going back to it. So again, all of these stages, any stage of our memory, there could be forgetting, whether bad encoding, repetition, somebody else interfering with my encoding, all these things can get in the way of our memory. Now, usually when we think of a lack of memory, the word that comes up is amnesia. Amnesia is a pretty serious, severe thing for a lot of people. Amnesia, it tends to be, it could be a lesion in your brain, a stroke that happened, whatever, and it destroyed particular memories. Sometimes amnesia is a case of getting into a car accident, brain trauma. That could be it. And most amnesia falls into what is called retrograde amnesia. Retrograde amnesia, we're talking right here, where you sort of forget a gap of time. And again, it could be because of a stroke, destroyed certain memories. It could be sometimes that little bit of time was never encoded correctly. A lot of people who are go through depression or anxiety, there's little gaps in their memory because of during that time they weren't making the memories correctly, or they put them in the wrong place and they can't find them, as we talked about before with context memory. And it's the other one I'm looking for. My brain just left me. But the mood congruent memory, I think that was the other one I was looking for. So anterior grade amnesia is our inability to make new memories. Clive Waring, we talked about as being an extreme of that he's always stuck in the moment, in the 30 seconds. I mean, some people, their memories a little less severe than that. They can't remember like a week ago. I can remember yesterday and the day before, but to go a week ago, that starts to become difficult because of deterioration in their brain. But what's interesting about this is it tends to affect semantic memory, which is facts that we get, and episodic memory, specific things that happen to us. But it has little impact on procedural memory. They took a group of people and they had them go play golf at a particular range that they had never played before, but they knew how to play golf. It was procedural memory. It wasn't hard. So they played a round of golf. And then they finished. Then they asked them to come back the following week. And they said, you guys remember playing golf here? And they're like, not really. So they play another round of golf and they get their particular scores. They come back a week later. You guys remember playing golf at this course? No, I mean, I remember playing golf, but not at this course. And they played again. They played again. They did this again and again, week after week after week, even though these people had no episodic memory of playing golf on this course. What they discovered was their scores got better. They got lower. They were better golfers on this particular course because even though they couldn't episodically remember being there, the procedural memory of playing golf again and again on that particular course in the cerebellum remained. Again, most of our forgetting comes down to encoding failure. We talked about the moonwalking bear. You're paying so much attention to the white shirts passing the ball that never gets encoded into the first place. We can't attend to everything in our environment at any particular time. You know, who followed you on the way to school, what was the color of hair of the person who you happen to pass by. I mean, if you think when you're walking to class, think of the hundreds of people that you pass by. And if I asked you to pick one of them out of a lineup, could you really do that? We don't encode everything. And as we become older, we encode even less, because everything that we experience is primarily based on memory. When I look at my house, I don't look at every brick in the wall and everything else because I've looked at my house many times. I just assume it looks the same, and it is the same. Whereas a little kid notices every little thing. Look at the little bug, look at the grass, look at the this, look at the that, because they're making new stuff. Also, our needs will have a lot to do with how much we encode. For example, if I told you on your phone, each number on your phone has, if you go to the keypad, it has letters over each particular number. If you were to dial somebody up on the keypad, it's got 3 letters over every number with the exception of 1. and 0, which is kind of an operator. But every other number has 3 letters. So if you get, some people will spell, here, there's my number, and they give you a name, how you gotta spell it. But if you had to think which 3 letters are next to the number 5, for a lot of us, it would be difficult. For a lot of us, we wouldn't use our memory. We'd be trying to figure it out. We'd be going, okay, ABC with 1, but wait, he said it starts with 2, so 2 is ABC. So we're not really using memory there. We're using more of our cognitive skills to figure it out in our parietal lobe. But if you think about it, it's JKL. But most people over the age of 35 know the answer to this. And the reason that most people over the age of 35 know the answer to this is because people over the age of 35 didn't always have smartphones. They would have flip phones, whatever. And when they would have to text, they would have to hit numbers and sort of Morse code the thing. For example, if I was dating a girl named Leslie and I wanted to type her name, I'd have to hit 5, 1, 2, 3, 5 times to get to an L. And if she was really particular about me capitalizing it, I'd have to hit it 6 times to get to a capital L. And we'd have to break up because that's a lot of effort. Not to mention I wouldn't want to date a person that I have to text all the time. So there's other reasons. Again, where are my keys? We never encoded it. We're in the wrong place when we're trying to retrieve it. You know, when we come downstairs, you know, I'm coming down for a glass of milk, but by the time I get downstairs, I forget I came down for that because I didn't encode it properly. All of these could be a situation. Again, if you take a look at these pennies, one of these pennies is accurate, and the one that's accurate is the one right in the middle. But the reason we don't necessarily remember which one is accurate is because we don't look at every detail of a penny. It's copper, it's got Lincoln, it's that big, that's all I need. We don't need every other detail. If someone suddenly had a penny and it didn't say Liberty on it, we wouldn't think it was counterfeit for someone who's counterfeit pennies. But we just would accept it because we don't need every little detail. We don't encode everything. Again, with the stop signs, and we talked about this before, as long as it's got 8 sides, it's red, and the white letters say stop, it's close enough. We don't need every little detail of it. Herman Ebbinghaus, and again, whenever you talk about memory, Ebbinghaus is the name that tends to come up. He talked before about the relearning study. When you learn something for the second time, it's easier than the first time. But he also looked at memory decay and how quickly it happened if there's no rehearsing going on. For example, everything I say to you right now, and if I were to ask you 30 seconds later with your echoic memory and it bouncing around, you'd be able to pick it up. But if you didn't write it down, you didn't rehearse it, you didn't place it with something you already knew, after about 20 minutes, you're going to forget 60% of what I said. At least 60%. And then after an hour, you're only going to remember half. And after 9 hours, we'll be down to a third. And then by the rest of by the time we get to further days, it gets less and less and less after a month. Then after we get to a month, it starts to crank down again. And then by the time we get all the way to here, this is after a year, and so this was a month. So 100%, which was 20% of what we originally learned. And then it starts to even out, because what you do is you build sort of what's I like to call a highlights package. You know, there's highlights of my junior year of high school. There's highlights of my 6th grade year of elementary school. There's highlights of my late 20s. And those are the memories we tend to go back to again and again. So we kind of have this highlight package that we put together, that we refer to or whatever. You guys a little bit different because you're a little bit more documented than I am. So you could go back and look at photographs and Instagram posts and everything else, which will impact your memory and probably make your memory better. Or maybe not necessarily better because you're dependent on it, but more accurate. It would make your recall more accurate. Other studies show that memory over the years, again, is a very similar curve. Again, if you go back to when I took Spanish as a junior in high school, by the time I was a senior or a freshman in college, without really using it that much, most of it I'm going to forget, which is going to go down here and down here after a number of days. And then from those number of days, it's going to be divided into half further again. And then, so my recollection of what I remembered in Spanish at the age of 52 is very similar to what it would have been at the age of 22, which was 5 years later. I remember it was Mr. York, and he wore clothes from the 70s and whatever else. That's pretty much there. But yeah, most of what we forget pretty early on in the process. So again, Forgetting is most rapid within those first 9 hours. Meaningful things, it's about me. Again, when it comes to memory, I love me some me. All of these things, the longer interval between learning, all of these things are what we talk about when it comes to memory. Now, sometimes memory is a result of I cannot get the information. It's easier to recall when given retrieval cues, which is again why we like the multiple choice test more than when we like the fill in the blank test, because the fill in the blank test, I got to go all over my brain. The multiple choice test gives me those cues where I can go, okay, now where can I find those files with these files with those files? Learning sometimes can get in the way of memory because it can disrupt it. There's what's called proactive and retroactive interference when it comes to memory. Proactive is more forward acting, which means that the past is dominant. Sometimes it's hard to learn new information because we hold on to the past. Emotions we have from the past, feelings we have from the past, all these particular things get in the way of new learning. If you move to a new house and you forget how to get there, but you know how to get to your old house. If you forget your new address, but you remember your old address, because your old address you've used again and again and again and again. Sometimes something that you're learning in a new class, let's say when I'm talking about some anatomy or something. You may remember the anatomy that you learned in anatomy class, but so the psychology stuff that I tell you about the amygdala or the hippocampus or the cerebellum, whatever, may be hard to add to that, even though it should be helpful. If you call your current girlfriend or boyfriend by your ex-girlfriend or boyfriend's name, because you're so used to using that name, whether an argument, whatever the case may be. So again, proactive is the past is dominant. So it's hard to make new memories because the past is so dominant. Now, retroactive interference is where recent memories get in the way of old memories. If I ask you the name of your 8th grade science teacher, well, you haven't used that for a while. You've had a bunch of other science teachers since then. Learning new students' names. I've got to, when I've got to learn new students' names, I've got to try to forget the old ones I have. So again, the recent, when I see a student that I haven't seen in a while, I haven't thought about them for a while. I haven't gone back to that particular memory. If I see a kid at HEB who's a cashier and go, "Hey, Mr. Porter, do you remember?" I go, tell me the year, tell me the class, tell me the period, and they start to give me those cues, and I can put it together. And I can remember exactly where they sat, and I could probably even tell them their grade. But if I haven't used it since then, it's a problem. Now, so again, the recent students I have, those I remember, the past goes away, kind of becomes minimized. Now, again, recent information becomes dominant, but we can tie it to past information as well. When you're taking your U.S. history class and you're talking about World War II, and then you go back to your world history class, and you can tie those things together, what you learned from world geography or what you learned from U.S. history in 8th grade, and it can help you. So again, what you want to do is you want to reduce the amount of time of interference to allow that recent information to become dominant. If you go home and study right after school, and then you go out and you hang out with friends, you may not remember necessarily the stuff you studied because going out with friends becomes the dominant thing. So it's better just to go out and hang and then study at night and then go to sleep and process it. And again, what I was talking about before, the positive transfer, where you take old information to help you learn new information, or you take the new information to better help you remember the old information. All of this can be very, very helpful in our memory. Again, what I just mentioned a second ago, retroactive interference. It's better to study before you go to bed, not as you're falling asleep, because if it's as you're falling asleep, that's no good. You're not going to remember those last few things you studied. But it's good to stop and then let your brain sort of go to sleep and let your work through those memories and sort of put them together. Because those new experiences will get in the way of old. And again, after we fall asleep, we give ourselves time to process it, as opposed to staying up all night. So other things there showing you difference between retroactive and proactive. Remember, proactive, the past is dominant. Retroactive, the most recent information is dominant. Sometimes we forget because we want to forget. Past experiences are harmful. We don't want to go to them, whatever the case may be. So again, we recall events in ways that are going to sort of confirm who we are. And this isn't always a positive thing either, because if you're facing depression, sometimes it's hard to remember the good times because you sort of want to justify your depression and why you're feeling that, or it makes you upset to remember the good times because you're like, why do I feel so numb now? Why can't I have those good? Well, I just don't want to think of those good times. So sometimes we're motivated to sort of justify our current thoughts and feelings and emotions that are valid. So again, repression is a defense mechanism that anxiety thoughts I want to push away. It's why some people will stay in a bad relationship because if I think about the bad things that this person is doing, then that means I was a fool to be with them. So I'll just ignore the bad things. Freud was very, very big on this idea of repression, as we'll talk about down the road. And he thought of a lot of things in our childhood were too traumatic for us to think about. And we had to go back and untie those knots. But the only way we could do that is through hypnosis, dream analysis, whatever, to get to those repressed memories. But our ego would have to sort of go to sleep or in some way become disarmed so I could deal with the super ego. My super waffle. So I could deal with my super ego and my id. In order to deal with that. A lot of times our memory is faulty due to construction errors because we don't want to just admit that we don't know. So a lot of times we make up things. And it's not meant to be a bad thing. You know, they're little details. We think it's harmless. It's a little white lie. It's no big deal. You know, for example, if I went to a restaurant last night with my wife and and you asked me about it, you go, what'd you have? I had some lasagna, I had some breadsticks, I had some tea, iced tea, good stuff. We had a little bruschetta as an appetizer. I told you these things. And then you asked me a question like, did the waiter bring you a menu? And I'll go, huh. Instead of just going, I don't know whether or not a waiter brought me a menu. I don't want to say that because if I say that, you don't even know how you get the menu, and I'll look like an idiot. So instead, I'll think about it and I'll just sort of imagine the waiter bringing me, yeah, sure, the waiter brought me a menu. And now that may have happened, that may not have happened. But what I'll do is in my mind, I'll make up this idea of a waiter bringing me a menu. And now that's part of the memory. The menu might have been sitting on the table. The menu might have been given to me by a hostess. I may have grabbed the menu on my way there, but since I don't know what happened, I make up this thing, which actually changes the memory. And then as I go back and tell the memory again and again and again and again and again, and all these little fillers, which seem harmless, you know, did you get a memory or did you get a menu or not get a menu? The more often you go to a memory, eventually the memory becomes more filler than actual memory because we're just adding stuff to it all the time. Because again, we can't just say, no, I don't remember. Could you help me out with that? So instead, a lot of times we make stuff up. Instead of asking a teacher a question because you don't understand material, you make up an answer or what you think must be right. Then that becomes your memory of the teacher saying that. And you study that false thing. And then you get it wrong on the test. And you're like, shocked. How'd I do so? I thought this was the right answer because you made it up to be the right answer because you're afraid sometimes to ask the question. So again, it's fine if this is amongst friends and everything else that you know, whether you had a menu or not a menu or whatever. But when you're a witness to a crime, you can't just make up details. You have to tell them sort of what's going on. Misinformation. A lot of times you can be led into remembering something wrong. A lot of times people who are psychopaths or sociopaths that are doing something called gaslighting that we'll talk about down the road, they try to influence your memory by trying to get you to think a particular way. A real great example of this is Elizabeth Loftus did this study at Stanford University where she had people watch a video of two cars in an accident. And then she asked them then she asked each of them a different question about the accident that they witnessed. One group was asked how fast were the cars going when they contacted each other. Another group, how fast were they going when they hit each other, when they bumped into each other, when they collided with each other, when they smashed into each other. And depending on the words that were used, it influenced how fast they thought the car was going, anywhere from 32 miles per hour all the way up to 43, 44 miles per hour, which is a 12 mile per hour difference. And again, maybe that doesn't seem like that big of a deal, but these should have been closer. You had a large sample size. It should have, there's a definite skew in the way that you ask it. And there could be, how fast were they going when they contacted each other? You know, contact, that's no big deal. How fast were they going when they smashed into each other? Oh my God, they must be going so fast, because of the way that I say it is going to influence your memory of it. Then what they did was they had the people go home, and they came back a week later and they said, hey, remember that accident that you saw? Yeah. Was there any glass on the ground? Was there any glass lying around at the end of the accident? And and strangely enough, those who were asked before how fast were the cars going when they smashed into each other were twice as likely to also say that there was broken glass, which there was none. Contacted, far less likely, because, well, they just contacted. And that's not even based on their memory. That's probably based on them. Well, they just contacted each other. There probably wasn't any broken glass. So it wasn't really based on their memory. It was based on a construction of their memory. So again, when you have people, and we'll talk about this down the road when we talk about gaslighting, they're trying to influence a memory by going, oh, well, this is how you're thinking, and it's not how it happened. And they're trying to purposely change your memory. So as memory fades in time, the more misinformation has been inserted into it. The mood we were in when somebody told us, it was part of a story that got a laugh. So I elaborate on that part of the story. We don't want to say that we don't know. When other people give you information, you take a look at this very famous picture of Tiananmen Square, one man standing in front of 4 communist Chinese tanks. But when people see this, you know, how many of you guys think this is what happened? It's amazing how many people believe, oh yeah, that one guy in front of the tanks at Tiananmen Square that was really crowded that day. We can change people's thoughts. We can change people's ideas. We can change people's beliefs by manipulating. We're so open to manipulation because our brain is fluid. It's so fluid. And this leaves us susceptible to politicians, to the media, to Instagram, to Twitter, that if we see it enough, we start to believe it to be true, even though it might not be true. It's why a lot of people believe the world's flat. Source amnesia, attributing to the wrong source or event. Your parents tell you stories about you being in the 3rd grade or whatever, and you start to go with their stories more than with what you experience. If you see videos of yourself or photos of yourself, you start to use those as your memory, even though you're seeing a picture of yourself, it's not from your eyes. So even though it may make the memory more accurate, it's not truly your memory. You're constructing your memory with that. Sometimes we confuse our dreams that we have with reality, and sometimes dreams that we didn't necessarily encode properly. When you're writing a poem, writing a song, saying words to someone, and it sounds eerily familiar, you're like, hey, this song is flowing so well, and you realize this is somebody else wrote it, but you didn't think someone else wrote it. The idea of deja vu, which that means that you've already experienced something. This tends to be an encoding issue with a lot of us. What deja vu is it happens in one of 2 ways. Either what you're experiencing, you're like, oh my God, I feel like I've been exactly here before. One of 2 things happens. Either number one is we have like a little skip in our brain as we're processing in that 10th of a second and whatever. And so when it takes that 10th of a second, our memory is of kind of 2 seconds ago, but we think it was of 2 weeks ago or whatever else. So we're mistaken a little bit there. Or what we do is we take a past event or a past thought or whatever the case may be, and we change that memory to match up with what's going on. You know, let's say I had a dream of meeting a brunette at a grocery store, and then I meet a blonde at the mall, and I go, oh my God, it's deja vu. I swear this happened in my mind before. So I took that past memory and changed it to this current memory. Again, what I was talking about before with gaslighting. I forgot that I put this in here. This is when a person becomes a victim of another who's attempting to twist their words. That's what gaslighting is. This has been like a real buzzword over the last 3-4 years. But people who are victims of physical or emotional abuse, who are convinced that it was their fault for causing it. Well, if you had never done that, I would have never had to have acted this way, or you're believing it wrong, or you're thinking of it just to harm yourself. So a lot of times people who are psychopathic, sociopathic, one of the ways that they control other people is to purposely try to manipulate their memories so that the person who's doing the manipulation can come off as the victim. Hey, it's their fault. I didn't do it, and da 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 da. And you're the one who's difficult. You're the one who's having the weird thoughts. It's not me. You're just looking at it wrong. You're high maintenance and all these other things when it's actually them. It's a very abusive thing to do. It's incredibly abusive to do, but it's a controlling sort of way that you become dependent on this person for their perspective, because that becomes your perspective. And that's why sometimes when we're in these abusive relationships, which could be with family members, which could be with romantic relationships, which could be with friends, we just got to get away from them so we can think clearly and not have them constantly making us in believing these false memories that are not true. It's a form of psychological abuse. A lot of times it's difficult to discern true and false memories because, again, we're constantly putting these together. False memories are easier to remember because false memories, they're kind of the gist of what happened, and the details, we make them up as we're going. It's hard to remember every specific detail that happened. And again, when our ego gets involved a lot of times, especially if the police are here and, hey, well, did you witness this? I want to be a witness. I want to help them. I want to help solve this crime. So I'll give them everything I know, and then I'll probably add some stuff to make it seem more accurate. And it's not necessarily the truth of what happened. And again, if you watch the 60 Minutes report that I asked you to watch on the woman who was Jennifer, who was a victim of sexual assault, you can see how those false memories sort of take over. Children's episodic memories really had only started since about 3 or 4 years of age, and by 5, they're able to go back a little bit in time. But children have incredible imaginations, and a lot of times, I mean, if you think about it, when you were a kid, did you have an imaginary friend? Because a lot of times kids have difficulty of what's imagination and what's real. Also, if you think of every time you've lied to your parents, well, most every time you've lied to your parents, because you don't want to get in trouble. And for a little kid, it's all about survival. I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want them to not like me, And so if the parent says, tell me what the bad man did, well, you want a bad man story? I'll give you a bad man story because that's what you want. Think of how many times you've been in an argument. What do you want me to say? We don't even want to give necessarily the truth. Just what do you want to hear? Just so this can end. And for a kid, I just want to get out of trouble. So here it is. This is why a lot of times when it comes to childhood testimony, the most dependable way to do it is not to have the teacher ask the question, or the parent ask the question, or any authority figure, police officer. You need to kind of bring in a stranger that has no skin in the game with the child, so that the child can, okay, I'll tell this person the truth because they have no authority over me. I can't get in trouble with this person. So more likely to do at that time. Memories of abuse. I think this is the last thing. Some of them are repressed. Some of them are constructed. A lot of times we repress it because we don't want to admit that we were victims of abuse, because a lot of times when we're victims of abuse, there's shame that comes with that. But you're the victim. There shouldn't be shame. But we take shame. How did I let this happen? How did I let myself in that situation or whatever? So instead of that, we'll just sort of pretend it never happened, or it wasn't as bad as what I thought it was. A girl who's a victim of a sexual assault who says, well, it wasn't really assault because I put myself in this position. It was assault. If you said no, and it was assault. But a lot of times, they'll sort of construct that because they don't want what's worse, me being a fool, putting myself in this situation, or me being sexually assaulted. Well, the sexual assault, it's worse. We all make mistakes, but that's worse. Sometimes what we'll do is the memory completely disappears. You'll have a kid who a lot of times they'll displace it onto something else. Let's say you were a victim of abuse as a child, but you don't tell the story of it being you. You tell the story of, there was this kid in my neighborhood and his parents, whatever. And you're like, and other people go, oh yeah, that's so bad. Yeah, it's bad. And then after you tell that story as a kid in a neighborhood, you start to believe that it was truly a kid in the neighborhood and it wasn't you. because you don't want to, again, believe that you were the victim of abuse, and because you have to live with you. You got to be the PR of you. And so a lot of times you don't deal with it. So again, false memory syndrome is when we tell these, not lies, they're not lies, but these inaccurate things. And then after a while, they start becoming our truth. Because we've told it so many times, it actually in our minds becomes part of our past. So again, it's not a lie, it's a false memory. There's a big difference between the two. Not a lie, it's a false memory. All right, I think that wraps us up with that. There we are. So that should be Unit 4, Lecture 4. More stuff there if you want to look at on memory. And if that was, if you're in Psych, it would have been Unit 3, Lecture 4 as well. A lot of stuff there if you want to go back and take a look. All right.